Okay, welcome to the Investigative Journal on this April 1st, 2016 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony, and you're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You can listen to my show every evening from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. That's Pacific time, or you can listen to it at 11 a.m. Pacific time, or if not, go to my website at arcticbeacon.com. That's ARCTICBEACON.com. And you can listen to shows regarding the Vatican-led New World Order all the way back 10 years. Now, today I'm going to touch on a subject that seems to get under some people's skins. It seems to strike a nerve, and it strikes a nerve in a lot of people. Scientific people think this theory of the flat earth is ridiculous. Then there are those who don't. Then there are the Christian people who are divided amongst what the Bible says about it. Now, my reading of the Bible, I believe it leans more towards a flat earth than a round earth. And since I'm a journalist, and I go where others fear to tread, I have to deal with this subject. And if it may strike a nerve in some people, just sit back, be patient. Remember this, each one of us doesn't know it all, and if we put it all together, put what I know and what everybody else knows in a big jar, maybe we can get an answer. So I am going to say that I would like to again touch on the flat earth theory. And let me tell you why. I don't believe a word that NASA says. It is a part of the beast. And, you know, I used to believe that the earth was round. And also, we went to the moon. Then I decided that after looking at the evidence and looking at all the people and having them on my show for years ago regarding this subject, it's impossible that we went to the moon. Then I started thinking, wow, does NASA tell us some truth and then none? I think they are lying about a lot of things. Now, if you look back at some of the old navigators in the 1700s, you know, I would rather take their word for it than I would to take a 21st century NASA scientist, because I don't believe a word they say. And if you subscribe to the fact that don't commiserate with the beast, then I don't know how some people, now there are a lot of Christians who say, well, I'm just not interested in this subject, and that's all right. I mean, this is not a make or break kind of situation. There are a lot of important things going on right in the world today, but this is an interesting subject. And for those who have taken the time to email me with all of their ideas, and really basically a couple of them, a couple people that are kind of close to me too, kind of said, Greg, you're off base when it comes to the flat earth theory, but I don't think so. I think I'm going to make a statement right now. I think that more information out, the more you start studying this, the more information you receive. Wow. And even when you start reading these Bible verses, look, I can read the Bible just like anybody else. And I think my opinion is just as valid as everyone else. Because didn't God say he makes everyone equal? So if he makes everyone equal, then I guess my opinion on this is equal to those who think it is a round earth. Now then there are those who think it's round and it moves and it spins in a ball, and those who say it's round and it's stationary. However, if you read the scriptures from the way I read it, I believe it states, well, put it this way. I think it lays a very, very strong argument that the earth is flat, stronger than that it is a globe. Now, let's move away from that and look at the 17th, 16th, 17th century navigators. And I pulled up a video here. It's about a 23-minute video. The South Pole does not exist. It's pretty good. Now, Eric Dubay, D-U-B-A-Y, has really opened up this door for a lot of people on the internet. And if you go and you start researching, you'll find he is one of the leaders in this. Now there are those who say he's a COINTEL operator. There are those who say he's not. And I say it doesn't matter. I say listen to all the information, then figure it out for yourself. And this particular video is pretty good. And I thought, you would listen to it, because, I really, on this first day of April, I enjoy striking a nerve to those who are so sure of themselves that, I don't know why they are. If you're so sure of yourself that the earth is round, then let's take a walk around the earth together. Go from the North Pole to the South Pole. I will tell you, it'll never happen. You'll never get there. And navigators back in the 17th century told us that. So for all you know-it-alls out there, listen to this one. Pretty good 23-minute video by this man called Eric Dubé. Now, whether he's a COINTEL guy or not, it doesn't matter. Remember what I said about that? You got to listen to it. You can take it for what it's worth. But they, like I said, many people used to say, well, Alex Jones, I said, yes, he may be. But it doesn't really make any difference. He gives a lot of good information. But he takes you in the wrong direction. Now, this guy could be doing the same thing, or he could be on the level. That's for you to figure out. But there is some good information in this. And I thought, since it's April Fool's Day, I thought it'd be a good day to do this, because I could always say, oh, I'm just doing this as an April Fool's joke. But I'm going to tell you the truth, I'm not. I'm going to go on the level and say that I think there's more information in the Bible that states the earth is flat, and there's more information out there stating that NASA is lying to you. So who would you rather believe? Would you rather believe the Bible? Would you rather believe the 17th century navigators? Or would you like to believe those scientists who work for Satan in NASA? Just look at their logo. It's a logo of a serpent's tongue. Well, anyway, let's listen to this before I take up the whole show.
In the flat Earth model of the cosmos, the North Pole is the immovable center of the world and the entire universe. Polaris, the North Star, sits straight over the North Pole at the highest point in the heavens, and like a slowly rotating planetarium dome, all the celestial bodies revolve around Polaris and over the Earth once per day. The sun circles over and around the circumference of Earth every 24 hours, steadily traveling each day from the equator during the March vernal equinox up to the Tropic of Cancer at the June summer solstice, back down to the equator for the September autumnal equinox, and all the way down to the Tropic of Capricorn on the December winter solstice. In the flat Earth model, the South Pole does not exist at all, and Antarctica is instead a gigantic ice wall extending the circumference of Earth, holding in the oceans like a giant bowl or a world cup. As strange as this concept may sound at first, it is a fact that if you set a bearing due south from anywhere on Earth, inevitably at or before 78 degrees southern latitude, you will find yourself face to face with an enormous ice wall towering 100 to 200 feet in the air, extending to the east and west the entire circumference of the world. General Greely in Antarctica, or the hypothetical southern continent, wrote, "The ice barrier, so frequently referred to in accounts of the Antarctic regions, is the forefront of the enormous glacier covering or ice cap, which, accumulating in vast undulating fields from the heavy snowfall, and ultimately attaining hundreds, if not thousands of feet in thickness, creeps from the continent of Antarctica into the polar sea. The ice barrier, yet a part of the parent ice cap, presents itself to the navigator who has boldness enough to approach its fearful front as a solid perpendicular wall of marble-like ice ranging from 1,000 to 2,000 feet in thickness, of which from 100 to 200 feet rises above, and from 800 to 1,800 feet sinks below the level of the sea." Dr. Samuel Robotham wrote, "It has been demonstrated that the Earth is a plane, the surface center of which is immediately underneath the star called Polaris, and the extremities of which are bounded by a vast region of ice and water and irregular masses of land. The whole terminates in fog and darkness, where snow and driving hail, piercing sleet, and boisterous winds, howling storms, madly mounting waves, and clashing icebergs are almost constant. Antarctica is not the tiny ice continent found confined to the underside antipode of astronomers' globes. Quite the contrary, Antarctica literally surrounds us 360 degrees, encircles every continent, and acts as a barrier holding in the oceans. The most commonly asked questions and the greatest mysteries yet to be solved are, how far does the Antarctic ice extend outwards? Is there a limit? What lies beyond, or is it just snow and ice forever? Thanks to UN treaties and constant military surveillance, the North Pole and Antarctica remain cloaked in government secrecy, both purported no-fly and no-sail zones, with several reports of civilian pilots and captains being shooed away and escorted back under threats of violence. Dr. Samuel Robotham wrote, "How far the ice extends, how it terminates, and what exists beyond it are questions to which no present human experience can reply. All we at present know is that snow and hail, howling winds, and indescribable storms and hurricanes prevail, and that in every direction human ingress is barred by unsealed escarpments of perpetual ice, extending farther than the eye or telescope can penetrate, and becoming lost in gloom and darkness." Before reaching the Antarctic ice wall, navigating the increasingly tumultuous southern oceans, explorers encounter the longest, darkest, coldest nights and the most dangerous seas and storms anywhere on Earth. Vasco da Gama, an early 16th century Portuguese explorer of the South Seas, wrote how the waves rise like mountains in height, ships are heaved up to the clouds and apparently precipitated by circling whirlpools to the bed of the ocean. The winds are piercing cold, and so boisterous that the pilot's voice can seldom be heard, whilst a dismal and almost continual darkness adds greatly to the danger. In 1773, Captain Cook became the first modern explorer known to have breached the Antarctic Circle and reached the ice barrier. During 3 voyages lasting 3 years and 8 days, Captain Cook and his crew sailed a total of 60,000 miles along the Antarctic coastline, never once finding an inlet or path through or beyond the massive glacial wall. Captain Cook wrote, "The ice extended east and west far beyond the reach of our sight, while the southern half of the horizon was illuminated by rays of light, which were reflected from the ice to a considerable height. It was indeed my opinion that this ice extends quite to the pole, or perhaps joins some land to which it has been fixed since creation." On October 5, 1839, another explorer, James Clark Ross, began a series of Antarctic voyages lasting a total of 4 years and 5 months. Ross and his crew sailed 2 heavily armored warships thousands of miles, losing many men from hurricanes and icebergs, looking for an entry point beyond the southern glacial wall. Upon first confronting the massive barrier, Captain Ross wrote of the wall, "Extending from its eastern extreme point as far as the eye could discern to the eastward, it presented an extraordinary appearance, gradually increasing in height as we got nearer to it, and proving at length to be a perpendicular cliff of ice, between 150 feet and 200 feet above the level of the sea, perfectly flat and level at the top, and without any fissures or promontories on its even seaward face. We might, with equal chance of success, try to sail through the cliffs of Dover as penetrate such a mass." William Carpenter wrote, "Yes, but we can circumnavigate the south easily enough, is often said by those who don't know. The British ship Challenger recently completed the circuit of the southern region, indirectly to be sure, but she was 3 years about it, and traversed nearly 69,000 miles, a stretch long enough to have taken her 6 times round on the globular hypothesis." Dr. Samuel Robotham wrote, "If we now consider the fact that when we travel by land or sea, and from any part of the known world in a direction towards the North Polar Star, we shall arrive at one and the same point, we are forced to the conclusion that what has hitherto been called the North Polar region is really the center of the earth, that from this northern center the land diverges and stretches out, of necessity, towards a circumference which must now be called the southern region, which is a vast circle and not a pole or center. In this and other ways, all the great navigators have been frustrated in their efforts, and have been more or less confounded in their attempts to sail round the earth upon or beyond the Antarctic Circle. But if the southern region is a pole or center, like the north, there would be little difficulty in circumnavigating it, for the distance round would be comparatively small. When it is seen that the earth is not a sphere, but a plane, having only one center, the north, and that the south is the vast icy boundary of the world, the difficulties experienced by circumnavigators can be easily understood. If the earth were truly a globe, then every line of latitude south of the equator would have to measure a gradually smaller and smaller circumference the farther south traveled. In other words, the circumference at 10 degrees south latitude would comprise a smaller circle than at the equator, 20 degrees south latitude would comprise a circle smaller than 10, and so on. If, however, the Earth is an extended plane, then every line of latitude south of the equator should measure a gradually larger and larger circumference the farther south traveled. 10 degrees south latitude will comprise a larger circle than the equator, 20 degrees south latitude will comprise a circle larger than 10, and so on. Likewise, if the Earth were a globe, lines of longitude would bubble out at the equator while converging at the poles, whereas if Earth is an extended plane, lines of longitude should simply expand straight outwards from the North Pole. So which is actually the case? David Wardlaw Scott wrote, "Upon the principle as taught by Scripture and common observation that the world is not a planet but consists of vast masses of land stretched out upon level seas, the north being the center of the system, it is evident that the degrees of longitude will gradually increase in width the whole way from the north center to the icy boundary of the great southern circumference, in consequence of the difference between the actual extent of longitudes and that allowed for them by the nautical authorities, which difference, at the latitude of the Cape of Good Hope, has been estimated to amount to a great number of miles. Many shipmasters have lost their reckoning, and many vessels have been wrecked. Ship captains, who have been educated in the globular theory, know not how to account for their getting so much out of their course in southern latitudes, and generally put it down to currents. But this reason is futile, for although currents may exist, they do not usually run in opposite directions, and vessels are frequently wrecked, whether sailing east or west. During Captain James Clark Ross's voyages around the Antarctic circumference, he often wrote in his journal, perplexed at how they routinely found themselves out of accordance with their charts, stating that they found themselves an average of 12 to 16 miles outside their reckoning every day, some days as much as 29 miles. Lieutenant Charles Wilkes commanded a United States Navy exploration expedition to the Antarctic from August 18, 1838 to June 10, 1842, almost 4 years spent exploring and surveying the Southern Ocean. In his journals, Lieutenant Wilkes also mentioned being consistently east of his reckoning, sometimes over 20 miles in less than 18 hours. Dr. Samuel Robotham wrote, "The commanders of these various expeditions were, of course, with their education and belief in the Earth's rotundity, unable to conceive of any other cause for the differences between log and chronometer results than the existence of currents. But one simple fact is entirely fatal to such an explanation, that when the route taken is east or west, the same results are experienced. The water of the southern region cannot be running in two opposite directions at the same time, and hence, although various local and variable currents have been noticed, they cannot be shown to be the cause of the discrepancies so generally observed in high southern latitudes between time and log results. The conclusion is one of necessity, forced upon us by the sum of the evidence collected that the degrees of longitude in any given southern latitude are larger than the degrees in any latitude nearer to the northern center, thus proving the already more than sufficiently demonstrated fact that the Earth is a plane, having a northern center, in relation to which degrees of latitude are concentric, and from which degrees of longitude are diverging lines, continually increasing in their distance from each other as they are prolonged towards the great glacial southern circumference." Reverend Thomas Milner wrote, "In the southern hemisphere, navigators to India have often fancied themselves east of the Cape when still west, and have been driven ashore on the African coast, which, according to their reckoning, lay behind them. This misfortune happened to a fine frigate, the Challenger, in 1845. How came Her Majesty's ship Conqueror to be lost? How have so many other noble vessels, perfectly sound, perfectly manned, perfectly navigated, been wrecked in calm weather, not only in dark night or in a fog, but in broad daylight and sunshine, in the former case upon the coasts, in the latter upon sunken rocks, from being out of reckoning, under circumstances which until now have baffled every satisfactory explanation. The equatorial circumference of the supposed ball Earth is said to be 24,900 statute, or 21,600 nautical miles. A nautical mile is the distance following the supposed curvature of the Earth from 1 minute of latitude to the next. A statute mile is the straight line distance between the two, not taking into account Earth's alleged curvature. The Australian Handbook Almanac Shippers and Importers Directory states that the distance between Sydney and Nelson is 1,400 nautical or 1,633 statute miles, allowing a more than sufficient 83 miles as the distance for rounding Cape Farewell and sailing up Tasman Bay to Nelson leaves 1,550 statute miles as the straight line distance from the meridian of Sydney to the meridian of Nelson. Their given difference in longitude is 22 degrees, 2 minutes, 14 seconds. Therefore, if 22 degrees, 2 minutes, 14 seconds out of 360 is 1,550 miles, the entirety measures 25,182 miles. This is larger than the Earth is said to be at the equator, and 4,262 miles greater than it would be at Sydney's southern latitude on a globe of said proportions. 1/360th part of 25,182 gives 70 miles as the distance between each degree of longitude at Sydney's 34-degree southern latitude. On a globe, 25,000 miles in equatorial circumference, however, degrees of longitude at 34 degrees latitude would be only 58 miles, a full 12 miles per degree less than reality. This perfectly explains why Ross and other navigators in the deep south experienced 12-plus mile daily discrepancies between their reckoning and reality. The farther south traveled, the farther the divide. Dr. Samuel Robotham wrote, "From near Cape Horn, Chile, to Port Phillip in Melbourne, Australia, the distance is 9,000 miles. These two places are 143 degrees of longitude from each other. Therefore, the whole extent of the Earth's circumference is a mere arithmetical question. If 143 degrees make 9,000 miles, what will be the distance made by the whole 360 degrees into which the surface is divided? The answer is 22,657 miles, or 8,357 miles more than the theory of rotundity would permit. It must be borne in mind, however, that the above distances are nautical measure, which, reduced to statute miles, gives the actual distance from the southern region at a given latitude as 26,433 statute miles, or nearly 1,500 miles more than the largest circumference ever assigned to the Earth at the equator. Similar calculations made from the Cape of Good Hope, South Africa, to Melbourne, Australia, at an average latitude of 35.5 degrees south, have given an approximate figure of over 25,000 miles, which is again equal to or greater than the Earth's supposed greatest circumference at the equator. Calculations from Sydney, Australia, to Wellington, New Zealand, at an average of 37.5 degrees south, have given an approximate circumference of 25,500 miles, greater still. According to the ball Earth theory, the circumference of the Earth at 37.5 degrees southern latitude should be only 19,757 statute miles, almost 6,000 miles less than such practical measurements. Dr. Samuel Robotham wrote, "The above..."
Okay, we're going to take a break, come back, and finish this up on the Investigative Journal.
The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
Okay, we're back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal, and we're discussing the Flat Earth theory today. And let me mention this. Now, you know my nationality is Polish, and you realize that I've spent a lifetime in America listening to Polish jokes. I guess I've been the brunt of them, and, so what? You got to be able to laugh at yourself, or how can you really have fun in life? But anyway, let's think about it. Copernicus, who came up, the first one to come up with the globe theory, was Polish. And I ask you, are you going to believe a Polak, especially one who was an occultist? And do you realize that none of his theories have ever been proven scientifically? Oh, they come up with all these mathematical numbers and equations that have really make no sense. Now, take it from another Polak. The other day, someone asked me to take their boat and drive it from Ventura to San Diego. And while I'm out there on the ocean, by myself with my 2 dogs, you have a lot of time to look at horizons. You have a lot of time to use a sextant. There aren't many people in the world that even know how to use a sextant anymore. And while I was out there, I measured the distance I was going. You do a little bit of calculation, and you always use the sun. And the sun, according to my calculations, was only about 3,000 miles away. Now that differs from NASA. But are you going to believe a Polak like me? The point I'm trying to make is that what I'm talking about here, I sounded very brash in the opening of my show, stating that I categorically think the earth is flat. But I want to say this. There may be a time when I change my mind again. And the nice thing about this issue, it's not a life or death situation. It is just something that I think each of us kind of, when you put your head on the pillow at night before you go to sleep, you just kind of wonder, what do we live on? It's that simple. Whether it's a globe or whether it's flat, we're all going to live the same way. But it's kind of neat to take a subject like this, because we deal with so many subjects, especially ones, and talk about the Bible. Here's my thinking. When you talk about the book of Revelations, and you get people interpreting it, and you can't see the Vatican, and they're like trying to mislead you like the Jesuits do, that turns into a life and death situation. Many people have been killed over that. This issue is a bit different. So I think there's issues in the Bible that God gives bigger weight to than others. This one, I think what he did is he let you look at it in the Bible, and he said, guys, go and figure it out. And isn't it nice sometimes to have an issue like this that basically is only going to lead to who's really deceiving you? Was it that Copernicus occultist Pollock back in the 1500s? Is it NASA? Or is it some of the people in the 15th century, or all the people before? Just in the last couple hundred years, there were millions of people that never even gave it a thought that we were spinning at, thousands of miles, and there was these solar systems. They had no idea. You're going to believe those people, these navigators? Well, it's up to you. But the reason I like to do this subject sometimes is it really just kind of lets your mind wander away from the killing fields that we see now going on in the world. And that's all it is. So don't let it get to you. It's not that kind of issue. But it is one that will expand your mind, because I believe that everything that you believe, sometimes you've had to disbelieve before you really understand it. So anyway, let's get back, finish this up. There's about 6 minutes, and then I've got another one to play for you on the Flat Earth, so stay tuned.
Calculations are, as already stated, only approximate, but as liberal allowances have been made for irregularities of route, etc., they are sufficiently accurate to prove that the degrees of longitude, as we proceed southwards, do not diminish as they would upon a globe, but expand or increase as they must if the earth is a plane, or, in other words, the farthest point, or greatest latitude south, must have the greatest circumference and degrees of longitude. And William Carpenter wrote, "Parallels of latitude only, of all imaginary lines on the surface of the earth, are circles, which increase progressively from the northern center to the southern circumference. The mariner's course in the direction of any one of these concentric circles is his longitude, the degrees of which increase to such an extent beyond the equator, going southwards, that hundreds of vessels have been wrecked because of the false idea created by the untruthfulness of the charts and the globular theory together, causing the sailor to be continually getting out of his reckoning. With a map of the earth in its true form, all difficulty is done away with, and ships may be conducted anywhere with perfect safety. This, then, is a very important practical proof that the earth is not a globe."
I phoned up Antarctica. There's like a tourist umbrella you have to go through, and I sort of said, I've got loads of money, I've got boats in Hawaii and India, which I don't, and me and some friends were going to hack down to Antarctica and walk across it. And I got loads of emails of these people saying, no you don't, fill out your permits, you've got Orange membership, and fill out this, why are you coming? I got totally hammered just for saying I'm coming to Antarctica. What I found is you're only allowed in through New Zealand, South America at the bottom, and South Africa at the bottom. And they take you in, you see some penguins, you sleep somewhere cold, and they throw you back out, all for like $5,000. Now, it's totally locked down, and I did an article about it where I looked at the Treaty of Antarctica, which is some countries got together and locked it down. They've got a lot of science research going on there, and they just don't let anyone in. Now, where this treaty meet, they have a big table that's shaped in a pyramid with the top, which is, you can call me a conspiracy theorist, but there's obviously something there. What would you like to add on the Antarctica rim model, Eric?
Yeah, so Antarctica is not just the tiny ice continent on the bottom of the globe that it shows, but it is the case that no matter where you are on Earth, if you go southwards from there, you'll hit Antarctica. So if you imagine expanding that little Antarctic continent on the bottom of the globe out to an ice rim all the way across, around the Earth, the North Pole being in the center, anywhere you go in a straight line, you will end up going to the ice wall.
Yeah, and many boats through, since the 40s, 50s have talked about my instruments went crazy, there were ice walls for hundreds of miles, I got lost. There's so many of these stories.
Yeah, and so they say that there's a South Pole somewhere too on part of that guided tour that you're talking about. They've got an arbitrary point along the Antarctic ice that they've put a red and white barbershop pole with a ball earth on top of it and claim that that's the South Pole. But they even admit that it's not the real South Pole because the real geomagnetic South Pole is constantly moving. So since it's constantly moving, you're never really going to be able to see it. But the reality is they can't have people going down there with a compass and checking to see if it really is the South Pole.
Last year, Prince Harry was down there, and he basically just made some filming. He was with Rupert and Tarquin and a few of his friends. And the story was, it was on all the mainstream news, Prince Harry in Antarctica. Oh, we had to go back, it was just too cold, my foot got blisters and frostbite. What the message to the subconscious is, it doesn't matter how rich you are, don't go there, it's too cold.
They know that Prince Harry and a team of injured servicemen and women have been walking to the South Pole. Well, they've got there, they've completed the 200-mile Walking with the Wounded South Pole Challenge, that's its proper name. They've spent more than 3 weeks trekking through Antarctica, and this was what it sounded like at the moment when they arrived at the bottom of the world.
Let's go!
Sounds quite restrained, doesn't it, after all that effort? Well, they spent 20 hours in a cold chamber. This was the prince and the other competitors who were with him to prepare for the conditions that they were going to find down there. The expedition was supposed to be a race. You might remember it being billed that way before it started, but the weather became so bad as they went along that they scrapped the competitive side of things and just joined up as one big team instead. And this was how Harry reacted after completing the mission.
We're here, we made it. It's Friday 13th. We've had so many things go against us. We've had beautiful weather, but bad weather before, and bad terrain, and injuries and stuff like that. But everyone's made it, all 12 of them, the whole group of 20, whatever it is. But the 12 wounded soldiers have made it. Couldn't have made it without everyone's help, especially back home. The founders, Ed and Simon as well. But everyone is so happy. Everyone's touched the ball. We've all had photos. We've all had hugs, a few tears here and there. But all in all, mission success, basically.
If you're wondering about that ball that he was talking about, it's the ceremonial South Pole at the Amundsen Scott South Pole Station. It's like a metal sphere on a red and white pole, and it's partly surrounded by the flags of the signatories of the Antarctic Treaty. So it's lovely for a photo, but the problem with it is it's not the real South Pole. It's about 300 metres away.
So the real South Pole, what is that?
Is it? Well, there's nothing. That's the thing. Is you can't see. To do it properly, to cover all your bases, you have to do both. You have to do the picture with the ball, and then you have to go and kind of hang around at the exact
why don't they move
longitude
the ball to
and
where the
latitude.
actual thing is?
Well, that's a very sensible question. It's not one I can answer, but it's a very good.
Okay, we have about 13 minutes left on the Investigative Journal tonight, discussing this theory of the flat Earth. And sometimes I wonder about this subject, and I've picked out another 14-minute video. This will fit in nicely, and sometimes I feel like Siskel and Ebert of the YouTube world. And man, how this YouTube world has grown in the last few years. It's incredible. And I find it interesting as a journalist because it really saves me a lot of time from interviewing all these people, because they say exactly the same thing if I interviewed them. So this gentleman here has a YouTube channel called The Truth is Stranger Than Fiction, has a 13-minute video regarding flat Earth reflection. Parallax or paradox. Let's listen.
Paradoxes are annoying. There's no doubt about it. Why am I talking about paradoxes? Well, having now been looking into this whole flat Earth issue for a good 7-8 months or so by now, I think if I'm honest with myself and honest with whoever might be watching various videos I put out and think most of us who have been engaged in this whole area of investigation and speculation and scriptural research and the whole 9 yards, I think if we're honest about it, we have to admit that there are at least a number of things that we're still, at this point, struggling to put together. And there's still a significant number of issues and questions which, at the current time, definitely just feel like paradoxes, especially when you get into the whole map question. And I've been recently wrestling with a few myself, to be completely honest. Just in this last week or so, I was coming across the whole issue of the equinox, since we just went through the spring equinox, and of course the people who are out to debunk the flat earth idea altogether are pointing to it as undeniable proof that we live on a globe, and this is the only way that the sun could rise at apparent due east from every point along the surface of the earth, and how you could have 12 hours of daylight at every point of the earth. And I fully understand how this is claimed to operate based on the globe model, with the earth being exactly between each of the solstice points on its alleged solar orbit and all that. And to me, this is a significant puzzle. It's a significant challenge. Similarly, I was just watching yesterday a video that Rob Skiba put out talking about the infamous flight from Chile to Australia that dips down and almost even touches Antarctica. He did this big lengthy piece looking at the Gleason's map and sort of examining this idea of the various quadrants on an azimuthal equidistant map, representing the same distances between each of the lines of longitude, both in the southern hemisphere and the northern hemisphere. And it's an interesting exploration of the topic, but from where I stand, it really does also start to have some serious problems with it as well, particularly if you take that premise and try and apply it to the more northerly latitudes. The closer you get to the North Pole, which are conventional flat Earth maps put at the center and allege that the sun and the stars are all rotating around. Obviously this is going to be a problem because just by definition, those distances are going to have to get smaller and smaller as you approach that singular point where they all converge. And so the bottom line is that, yeah, we still have a number of things that just don't seem to make sense. They don't seem to line up. And really, this isn't anything new. I mean, even from the beginning of looking into the whole flat Earth topic in general, when I was first taking a fresh look at the Bible and comparing all these ideas, you're presented with the sort of obvious seeming contradictions of a circular dome-enclosed flat Earth model, but then somehow you have the existence of the four corners and the four pillars, and then of course, and there's ideas of that those four corners are actually outside the dome, or I've put out a video exploring the idea of the four cardinal directions, where north, south, east, and west are in fact fixed directional points, which Enoch itself actually seems to describe far more than north being a point in the center, which everything revolves around, and south being just sort of an infinite ring around the whole thing. So there's all these really interesting ideas that somehow we keep coming back to again and again, but honestly we still are struggling to put a lot of these pieces together in a way that makes sense from our current perspective, our current point of understanding. So yeah, in a lot of ways it feels like you're just sitting in the middle of a big paradox, because at the same time, as I've been looking into this stuff now intently for months, when I came into it, I was already convinced that the Apollo moon landings were a hoax, and that was, I already had that under my belt, so to speak. But then as you start to look at everything that NASA and all the other space agencies have put out since their inception, so I've never been more convinced that nobody's ever been to space, or that even space, that we have sufficient evidence to believe that space exists. And I've been looking into all these historical progressions of heliocentrism and Copernicanism, the Copernican principle, and all these things, and so many of the pieces just fit together so perfectly. It just continues to point you in this direction, that it was all a necessary component of not just evolutionary cosmology, but a necessary foundation for the whole idea of the whole ancient aliens idea and alien deception and the UFO meme and on and on and on. But then, of course, the critics always bring it back to this point of what's the real model? What are we on? How does it work? Explain the stars. Explain this. Explain that. Everyone wants to see the model. Like Tiger Dan was saying, if you don't have a map, you don't have an argument. You don't have proof. And that's always the big push. We're always being pushed to solve it, to figure it out, and to if you can't answer all these seemingly contradictory and paradoxical questions, because like I said, not just I've never been more convinced that everything about space I've never been more convinced that everything we've been shown about space is fabricated. It's just an all-out hoax. And at the same time, when we look at all these curvature experiments, we don't find evidence of curvature. So if there's no curve, you have a plane. It's pretty simple. So, but then, then everyone's trying to solve all these questions, like the question of 24-hour daylight in Antarctica, and solve the southern pole stars, and solve all these, predominantly celestial questions, trying to understand what the heavens are and how it all works. And typically we're trying to do this, again, we're still adhering to the Copernican principle, even though we don't even, I think, consciously recognize we are, in terms of explaining it all in terms of physical, materialistic forces and mechanics, when I think since the beginning I've kind of really been forcing myself to re-examine those kinds of assumptions, and especially from a biblical point of view. We look at all the connections between the angels and the stars and the heavens, and you're thinking of these things now of a heavenly realm or of dimensional capacities that we maybe don't even have the lexicon to describe, or the dimensional models to really even try and put it together. I think the more you get in, it starts to break down, because you're not just dealing with a purely three-dimensional time-space framework. So what are we on? So what do we do? Where do we go? I mean, you can have a meltdown and start calling everyone a liar, or you can just quietly kind of slip away and just get frustrated with it. And that's something that I think I've seen a lot of people do, even if they haven't openly said a word about it. There's just been a number of people who were coming around, 6 months ago, 3 months ago, and suddenly I'm not seeing them, and I'm not hearing from them, and it makes me wonder. And I think this is a much more common thing, is that people just, I think, get burned out on it and get frustrated. They start hitting these roadblocks and these paradoxes, and either they conclude quietly that, well, maybe we really are just on a globe and we're in space, and the whole thing must be crazy, and I feel silly for even looking into it. They're just not sure, and they don't know what to think, and kind of just need to get on with life and not obsess about it. I can fully appreciate that feeling, but it's the kind of thing where once you've seen enough to where it's, I don't know about other people, but I'm the kind of person to where once I've seen too much to just walk away completely, to just not know that they're lying a great deal about the cosmology and the earth and the stars and the nature of the earth. And we know what the Bible says. We know what the Book of Enoch says. And we know that they are vastly different. We know that the space race, these space programs, are a unified hoax, which I know is just so difficult for many people to wrap their heads around. For me, that's one of the easier pieces. It always has been. But I think, like a lot of us, where we got hung up on is, how does it work? How do we explain it? How do we make the model? How do we build the model? And we keep coming back to these types of paradoxes. And I myself, even lately, started wondering. And recently, I just keep almost coming to the place of wondering, what fundamental assumption are we still making? What piece of the puzzle are we still missing? What are we still injecting into this whole thing that really we should go back and reconsider? And I don't know if it is this idea of the North Pole being at the center. A lot of people wonder about, well, what if Jerusalem was the center? And that was something I've wondered about since the beginning. But then it's like hard to reconcile that concept with the idea of either one or two poles. Like there's a magnetic pole, we know that. shouldn't that logically be the center? And, you know, Polaris, the North Star, being above the North Pole, and shouldn't that mean that that's the center? And again, I think you start driving yourself crazy going, like, all these, there's something about all these maps that are wrong, but then, you know, part of me wonders, are they all wrong but all right in a way? Are they all projections of something that we haven't even considered yet? And it just starts to sound kind of, I think, a different level of crazy. But something too that stuck out to me from almost the very beginning, when you're on the one hand looking at all these pieces of possible flat Earth concepts that have to do with, you know, circles, whether it's the circular Earth under a dome, and then the circuits of the luminaries going around a central point, and so you have all these circular aspects, and then you also have these square aspects of four pillars, of, you know, pillars and four corners, and you know, the four winds, and so it's always like it's this whole sort of underlying paradox of the circular aspects versus the square aspects, right? And interestingly enough, you know, that's one of the central little esoteric riddles embedded within Freemasonry.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.